The trade groups really help identify those themes, identify those kinds of legislative initiatives that are helpful, educate everybody, and get people on the same page.
The Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry, with your host, Adam Friedman.
The default industry is not solely limited to default law firms doing legal work on behalf of banks and loan servicers. There's a lot going on. There are many pieces of legislation or executive orders and cases that impact not only exactly how we practice, but the industry at large. And because of this, there are a number of trade organizations that play a major role bringing attorneys and their clients together to discuss some of these issues and also really pushing to enact legislation and really shape what's going on. I'm here today with Director of Client Relations, Michael Chisholm, and what we're going to walk through is kind of the role that these trade organizations play within our industry, how Friedman Vartolo interacts with them, engages with them, and participates in their events and some of their efforts, and just really why this is so important to our industry. So Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Good to be here.
I really do think certain trade organizations play a major role in shaping legislation and in taking law firms from being totally complete and separate entities and more of a unified group that can discuss these issues and weigh in on them and even affect change. In your experience, how do you interact with trade organizations?
We operate in our sphere in 6 states. There's obviously 50 states, handful of territories. People are doing different things all over the country, but there's common themes that come up. And the trade groups really help identify those themes, identify those kinds of legislative initiatives that are helpful, educate everybody, and get people on the same page. So when there's issues in California, we can talk about, could they impact us in New York? And these trade groups bring everybody to a point where they can discuss those together. The trade groups often have conferences, which get a lot of attention, but there's a lot of work that goes on around this too. We have members of our firm, Mike DeRosa, one of the partners, Kat Ponte, one of our other partners. They're on several important boards on the ISLE group, for instance. In their groups, they're creating and drafting memoranda and white papers, work on supportive briefs and cases that matter to the industry. So they're really like hands-on, boots on the ground. We go to conference events that are held, not just to go and see our clients and interact and meet other firms and bring back global information to our firm, but also to go through sessions where we are discussing these issues and coming up with creative ideas around them.
I think what's interesting too is when you go to some of these conferences, the conversation is not simply how the law is evolving, but there's a lot of other aspects to things, like how tech is evolving, how that factors into our industry. And I think these types of organizations really bring a lot of those ideas and themes together and put people in a situation where they can exchange those ideas and continue to push things forward. When you got into the amicus briefs, for someone who's unclear of what that means, like what does that mean?
The term amicus brief, I'm using a little bit loosely. In its core form, it's when we are joining arguments that are before other courts, appellate courts, Supreme Courts, on behalf of like the industry more broadly. Those might be issued from a trade industry group, or it might be from a firm on behalf of trade industry groups. So we're very interactive in those where we might be leading the charge on an appeal in New Jersey, like Kat did, or in New York. So we're working with other firms and with these groups and with their counsel to kind of craft supportive arguments in cases that matter to the industry at large.
I think what could get lost to an outsider is that while you have different law firms that in essence are competitors, right? In the big scheme of things, when there's something being changed via legislation or there's a policy being introduced, those politicians can be looking to a trade organization for their input. Because the reality is most people working in the industry on either side of the aisle are looking for a few things. It could be clarity. It could be not simplicity, but things have to work, right? So even if you have a bill that's being passed that's overly favorable to one side, the bill still has to function and be logical. And the firms that work within the industry really understand procedurally how bills that are being introduced and passed would impact everybody. So there are certain times where that could come about, where there could be a question as to a bill or an executive order or some type of policy change. And these trade organizations are effective at digesting them, explaining them, and either advocating for one side or really just advising as to how procedurally something would function. I think it's an interesting kind of like behind the scenes thing that many people not involved in it don't fully understand and don't fully get to see.
And as a firm, we're really energetic in supporting these groups. So like I mentioned, we have partners from our firm who are on active committees and doing really hard work. I am vice chair and going to be chair of the Junior Professionals and Executive Group Committee of one of our trade groups, ALFN. And you're actually going to be presenting on a panel at a conference coming up on AI in the industry. So we really find value in these. We're really proud to be sponsors of a lot of these events, and we see the benefit that it brings from bringing us all together.
Thanks for joining Michael Chisholm and I on the Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry. Thanks for tuning in. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.